I am excited to once again invite back Shawn Moon into the studio and talk about another book he has coming out. We talked about learning leadership from the scriptures a few years ago, and Shawn's a prolific author and is coming out with another book called Roots, Relationship, and Results. And the premise of this book is fantastic. Essentially, he found 100 plus leaders out there, some of them Latter-day Saints, and simply asked them, if you had one sermon to give to your family, your posterity, to those that you influence, what is the message that you would want to leave with those in your world? And what came from this was 11 principles that she put together in this book, and really powerful. We talk about how to be a leader when you're not called to a formal position as a leader. The way he puts it is leading when no one hands you the mic. We talk about trust, we talk about purpose, and this is just a good, well-rounded, thought-provoking interview that hopefully will have you reflect on what's your last sermon. If you were to leave one message with your family, with your children, with your posterity about leadership, what would it be? So here's my interview with Shawn Moon. Well, Shawn, welcome back to the Leading Saints podcast.
Thank you. What a privilege to be here. Thanks for the repeat.
Of course.
Opportunity.
Well, we enjoyed the last conversation, and it's all based on a book that you wrote. Maybe just give us the quick review of what book that was.
So we had a chance to talk a couple years ago. I had written a book entitled Learning Leadership from the Scriptures, and it was really based on when I was a missionary, I remember hearing President Kimball actually reading a talk that he wrote called Jesus, the Perfect Leader. And in that, he asserts that of all of the leadership, development that one can have, the greatest place is the Scriptures. And of course, the Savior himself is the most important model of leadership, but all of the Scriptures. And so I sort of percolated on that for a number of years and decided it actually came about. President Nelson gave a challenge to all the members of the church at the bicentennial of the First Vision, right as we entered into 2020. That great, year that we'll never forget. And so I decided that would be my project. And then COVID happened. Mm-hmm. And that derailed everything. But it gave me some time to think about it, and the book was a response to that. How the Scriptures really are the greatest manual for learning how to be a leader in all areas of life. And I did it on leading your own life, and leading in your family, and then leading in your calling. So that was our previous conversation.
Yeah, we'll definitely link to it so people can check it out. And you have a background with FranklinCovey. You're a CEO. I mean, you're in the leadership world, right?
I am. It's been my career. Spent about 3.5 decades with FranklinCovey, and had, my goodness, what an amazing opportunity to engage with women and men who just are extraordinary leaders. I spent 25 years working closely with Stephen R. Covey, and that one of the great privileges of my life, as well as years and years working with closely with Hiram W. Smith, who I love so much, who passed away recently, and left an indelible impression on me. And it's also been my privilege to work with leaders and executives and executive teams across the world, literally on every continent of the world, except Antarctica. That's still on the list, and hope to someday. Maybe you and I can go and we'll stand on the ice, and we'll have a conversation about leadership so that I can claim that continent. But working with these people on every continent and engaging them on how we can be more effective in our leadership with others. And so that's been a big part of my career. And in the last several years now, working as the CEO of a company called Zerorez, and we're all over the United States now, in the UK and Canada. And so it's been a really fun opportunity, not just to talk about leadership, but to actually, be a practitioner as the CEO.
Yeah. And we should also mention you're a stake president right now, but a very unique stake. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And it really speaks to this issue. So I spent many years of my life working with the wonderful YSAs of the church, and love that so much. My wife, Michele, and I love that experience. But I'm currently serving as a stake president of a married student stake. There are only 13 of these stakes across the world.
And how many are in Provo?
4.
Oh, really?
Only 4.
Really? Wow.
And I don't know exactly the number. I think there's 4 in Rexburg. There's 1 at ASU. I think there's one at Harvard, and a couple of others elsewhere. But these married students are magnificent. They are the future leaders of the church. And I have just really been so humbled by their goodness and by their desire to be lifelong disciples of Jesus Christ. It's really been such an extraordinary experience. I feel like one of the things that my counselors and I feel impressed as we look at our calling is to help prepare them in every way to be leaders. Again, leaders in their own life, leaders in their family, and leaders in building the kingdom, wherever they go. And so we have them to be a member of our stake. They need to be one of the spouses, one of the people needs to be a student in some, whether it be BYU or UVU or hair school, it doesn't matter. But they need to be, involved in furthering their education, even with pathways. But we only have them for a short period of time because eventually that time in their life comes to an end. And so they then get sent off into the world to go make their mark. And so we have them for just a short time, a year, 2 years maybe. And our job is to help prepare them to be leaders.
Yeah. Well,
and it's a phenomenal experience. I love them.
I bet. And I'm sure there'll be different stories and anecdotes maybe crop up as we talk through this new book you have, which is Roots, Relationship, and Results. Maybe tell us, when was the moment you sat up in bed and thought, I'm going to write this book?
So I actually am the co-author with two other people. One is a gentleman named John Lottie, who is a dear friend and colleague of mine. And then I have the privilege of doing this with my eldest son, who is a leadership consultant himself. And so he's out and about all over the world as well, working with leaders. And that is such a treat to be able to, both of them, and to be able to do this with my son is terrific. So he and I have been talking about this for a number of years. But the genesis of this really came about. For 25 years, I've had a group of dear friends, colleagues that were now scattered all over doing all kinds of different things. But we gather once a year, and we used to do this around a BYU football game, where we would go to an away game, and while we were there, we'd have a flag football game with the local elders quorum, and we'd play golf, and as the years have grown and we've gotten a little bit older, and the hairlines have thinned, and the waistlines expanded a little bit, we've dropped football.
Nice, love it.
This was a flag football game. Always ended up being full contact. That's how it works. But it's given us this forum to just talk. And how are you doing in your life? And what's happening in your marriage? And how are your children? And how's your health? And all of those sorts of things. And it's one of those rare forums that has just provided this opportunity to get real with each other. It's been really a beautiful experience. And we were actually sitting in the Hotel California where the Eagles wrote the song about, right?
Wow.
And we're having this conversation, and the topic came up about leadership. And if you had your loved ones around you and you had a chance to say leadership is a lot of things, it's not just one thing. In fact, I get a little, because I've spent my career teaching and writing and thinking and trying to practice leadership. I know that leadership is hard. It's not just one thing. You've got to be the leader in your own life, and you've got to be clear on your values and your focus and your direction, your vision, and how you manage and lead your life, and who's really responsible for your choices and all of that. And then you go to work and you have relationships, and you've got to navigate that. And hopefully you take an abundant approach, and you communicate effectively, and you engage people, relative to their strengths, and try to value the differences that others have, and do all of that in a way that balances your life. And it's tricky. And then at some point, Kurt, you're tapped on the shoulder. Winston Churchill had this great quote. I won't get it exactly right, but he said, in each of our lives, we are figuratively tapped on the shoulder to do something significant and meaningful and unique to our talents and abilities. And he goes on to say, what a shame if that moment finds us unwilling or unprepared to do that which could otherwise be our finest hour.
Yeah.
Well, we get tapped on the shoulder. And so we've got to get results with and through other people, not just as an individual contributor, but now how do you engage the hearts and minds of others so they don't just show up with their hands and their heads, but their hearts as well? And how do you do that in a way that engages them around a compelling vision? And how do you actually get them to do the right work, and how do you help them get a vision that they're also leaders and that they need to, and developing other leaders and doing it in this really complex environment, and hopefully doing in such a way that you're building, sustainable trust and all. So leadership is a lot of things, but if you had one lesson that you would want to pass on, what would that be? Sort of at that same time, I was reminded, you might remember back in 2006, there was a gentleman named Randy Pausch.
Yeah, I remember this.
And he was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And he was diagnosed kind of, wasn't expecting it, didn't have the symptoms, but diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And they did all the tests, and they came to him and said, you've got 5 to 6 months, it's terminal. And instead of, just tapping out, he decided to use that time to do something meaningful with his life. And so in addition to taking care of his family, which was remarkable, he decided to complete his last semester as a teacher. And he taught a course called Your Last Lecture. And I was really struck by that. It's a great book he wrote, Last Lecture, and such an inspiring story. In fact, when you see the TED Talk that he does when he's talking about this, he actually gets on the stage and does his push-ups.
Yeah,
He says,
I
I feel
that.
great. I feel fine. And in 5-6 months, I won't be here. And in fact, he wasn't. So what a profound concept. I started thinking about what would, not just your last life lecture, but your last leadership lecture. And so
this is scriptural as well. There's so many examples of people prophets on their deathbed speaking to their family.
I'm
right?
always drawn to that concept. I think the entire book of 2nd Nephi is a last lecture. I think Matthew 25 is the Savior's last lecture. I think that, we have so many of these vignettes in the scripture where the prophets are saying, this is what I want you to know. Of all the things, right? This is so critical. Anyway, with that in mind, and I'd just come off writing that other book, we decided that we would interview a number of leaders, and we picked 100. We ended up interviewing more than that, but CEOs, executives, athletes, entrepreneurs, judges, ecclesiastical leaders, just across all political leaders, across all walks of life, what their last lecture would be. It's been a really fascinating process. And
how long did those interviews last, or what was the process?
They started off. So here's how they started off. I told them it would take just 20 minutes or so. We just want and I sometimes would prepare them in advance. I'd like you to think about this. And sometimes I wanted to surprise them with the question because I wanted their top of head, initial reaction. It always went longer than that because this was their sort of response almost every time. They would say, wow, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought of that. Let me think about that. But then really quickly, they would come to, here's what it would be. If I had my children around me, this is what I would want them to know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And if you had more bandwidth in life, that would be a great premise for a podcast. The last lecture and some of these things. But a book is good enough for now. So,
but it would be, and people were so forthcoming, and I, having been in this world now for 3.5 decades, I have a pretty good network of great leaders around the world. But in some cases, I just reached out cold.
Yeah.
And when they heard the premise, they're like, yeah, I would love to do that. So it was really fun to get their kind of initial reaction to this and be like, that's something I'd love to share.
Yeah. And was the goal or the assumption that certain principles would come to the surface, or were you just kind of seeing where this would lead?
We really went in purposefully without any preconceived notion. I thought that this will sort of kind of naturally organize into 5 or 6 maybe themes, that would come up. And what we learned is that they didn't all say the same thing, but they did organize. And they organized into what became this really powerful leadership arc, leading to the title of our book, Roots, Relationships, and Results. And again, they didn't all talk about the same things, but some of them talked about the roots of personal leadership and the notion that if I'm going to be effective in my leadership with others, They said, I would want my posterity to know you've got to start with yourself. And here are some elements that you need to be aware of. Some of them talked about the criticality of the relationships in your life and how you engage with other people and how they end up feeling when you engage with them and that notion. And some of them talked about, at the end of the day, one of the things that we're responsible for as leaders is to get results. And here's some lessons that I've learned about that. So it ended up being actually 11 of these, what we call leadership attributes, that then fall into one of those 3 buckets. And after we had done, 40 or 50 of these things, and that leadership arc had kind of established itself, every subsequent interview, without us leading it, guided into naturally one of those 3 buckets: the roots, the relationships, or the results.
Yeah, that's interesting. And not that there's a clear parallel here, but just the past, present, future type of thing, or where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? I mean, there's a journey. Eternal connection there. Right?
Yeah, there's a journey that we go on as individuals and as leaders, and as we engage with other people. And that notion of starting with yourself, I remember my first day of high school. I was 14, it was 9th grade, and to that point, my parents said, they had emphasized grades, but I was far more interested in hanging out with my friends and playing sports and all of that. But then they said, all right, you start high school. This is when your grades matter. And they had really emphasized that point with me. And I remember being a little bit intimidated, and a lot was on the line, and you want to go to a good school and have a good life. So I remember I was literally the first 5 minutes of my first class in high school, 7 a.m. And my teacher, Mr. Williams, said, all right, welcome to high school, kids. In your brand new notebooks, take out a brand new sheet of paper, and we're going to have a quiz. And it is going to count on your final grade. And I remember thinking, oh no, this is going to count on my grade, and he hasn't taught us a single thing, and I'm going to fail it, and I'm not going to go to college, and all's lost. He said, it's just one question. It's very simply, he asked, who is the most important person in the world? And I remember sitting there in class thinking, what does he want me to say? I'm trying to read his mind, right? And I remember thinking, is it God? Is it my mom? I think I put down my mother, and I got it wrong, because the right answer is, what would you say? Who is the most important person in the world?
God or yourself, or I don't know.
So that was my conundrum there, and he said, it's you. And I remember thinking, that's a really egocentric response, right?
Yeah, it feels that way.
And he goes on to say that nobody else makes your choices for you. Nobody. Other people can influence.
Accountability.
But ultimately, you are responsible for you. And that's really where this begins, right? And so many of these people talked about, we want people to understand that they're responsible. Their choices matter. And this is not a book on the 7 habits, but I love this notion that Stephen R. Covey talked about in the 7 habits with habit 1, that between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, he said, lies our freedom to choose. And I think that's such a profound principle of life.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of where this journey begins.
Yeah. It makes me think of, in this context of, creating leadership context or leadership, the content in the context of being a Latter-day Saint.
Yeah.
So often we default to, you talk about this tap on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Like we sometimes wait for the bishop to tap us on the shoulder, or when the ward needs us, or the stake, and we wait around for that calling, when in reality, we enter temples all the time and make that 5th covenant, that the law of consecration, that we are covenanting to dedicate our time, talents, and everything that God's given us. And oftentimes we feel that, but I found the leaders that I interview that have made a difference, who they often feel like, I'm just a regular Joe in this ward, but I had an idea and I moved forward with it. It's this moment of them taking on responsibility, saying, I made that covenant. I'm not going to wait around to get a certain calling or to be invited to participate, but I'm going to move forward. And those are Zion builders.
I think so too. In fact, one of the really interesting interviews we had was with Liz Wiseman, and she wrote the New York Times bestselling book, Multipliers. And have you talked with Liz?
Yeah, she's been on several times.
I love
she's great.
She was phenomenal. And she said something that I've thought so much about. She said, that sometimes the best manifestation of our leadership, the title of the chapter is leading when no one's given you the mic, meaning how can you be a leader when you don't hold the formal title or have the formal calling?
Yeah.
And she said, maybe that's the best manifestation of leadership, because people don't follow you because you have the calling or because you have the title. They follow you because of other things that you do that invite your influence to be broadened and expanded. And I think that's such a really, really interesting concept. We are leaders in every aspect of our life. Leadership is, yes, when you have the calling, yes, when you have the title, you need to demonstrate leadership. But our entire life is about learning how to be a leader and leading when no one has handed you the mic, and how can I be a leader when I'm just a neighbor or just a friend or a cousin or an uncle or an aunt or whatever it is. Right? Not because you're influenced to do something to improve, to grow, not because I've told you or given you a commandment or an edict, but because I trust you, because I believe you, because you feel that from me, maybe more specifically because you feel my love for you. That's really the essence of leadership, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. You say here, some of the most powerful leadership we witnessed happened when people with no formal authority at all, just that step forward. And that really is that's the inspired leadership. I mean, because it's easy to slip in when you are called, it's easy to slip into this administrator role of like, well, I'm just making sure the lights turn on, the doors get unlocked and, doing the things. But when you have that calling from God, he's tapping you on the shoulder saying, no, lead, make a difference.
Make a difference. But when you don't, you can still lead, right? Liz gave the analogy of sometimes as parents, if you've been through raising teenagers, there's a certain point in your kids' lives where they say, you're not the boss of me. And, well, I'm still your parent. No, you're not. And there are those moments of learning how to influence when we can't lean on the title or the calling.
Yeah, it's so good. Is there another one you want to go to, or is there more to with
no, I mean, let's just wherever you go. I guess I would maybe I'll just go with the first one because I think it is so foundational.
This is the ordered lives?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The inner architecture of leadership.
Yeah. I think that one of the metaphors that we heard is that as leaders, you're more the thermostat than you are the thermometer. And so the first chapter is ordered lives, right? How we control ourselves, and what temperature we set the room to as the leader, right? Because everything we do as leaders communicates something, especially when we have formal positions or formal titles. People will watch everything we do, what we say, what we wear, how we engage, how we solve problems, how we don't solve problems, what time we show up, everything we do as a leader communicates, whether we want to or not. And so being deliberate about that communication, I think is really, really important. Had a chance to visit with Danny Ainge, who is currently the CEO of the Utah Jazz and was the executive of the year when he was with the Celtics and then was a two-time NBA champion in five NBA finals and but also played professional baseball at the major league level and just this amazing experience of leadership, served as a bishop. And I asked him this question and he said, it's really clear to me. He said, it is, again, this notion of your ordered lives and how you control your own emotions. What you bring as the leader makes such a difference. Your ability to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. And he gave a couple of really wonderful examples. He told the story of when he was playing for the Phoenix Suns, and they had Charles Barkley on the team. Charles Barkley had won the MVP that year in the NBA. So he was the best player in the NBA that year. And the Phoenix Suns were the best team in the NBA, far and away the best record. And so they had the first seed going into the playoffs. In the Western Conference, they were playing a 5-series game with home court advantage against the Los Angeles Lakers, who hadn't had a great year, and they were the 8th seed. So all you had to do is win 3 games. The first 2 were at home. Well, and he said, the Suns go on to lose game 1 and then lose game 2.
Wow.
and they're going to Phoenix, and it's first, to 3 wins. And he said, and we are losing at halftime. He said, our coach was Paul Westphal, and he talked about how Paul Westphal was this kind of leader that had the ability to really set the temperature with those around him, and his control, this inner control. He said, we go into the locker room at halftime fully expecting to just get chewed out. This whole season has led to this moment, and we're down in game 3 at halftime, behind 2-0. And he said, they're sitting in the chairs in the locker room. And he said, Paul Westphal just sits down and looks at all the players and says, does anybody know a good joke? He said they spent the entire halftime telling jokes and just bringing the temperature down. And they went on to win game 3 and win, the series and go on to the NBA Finals. That notion of being in control, right, is so critically important.
Yeah. And it's one of those things it has to happen organically, but you can nurture the soil for it to happen. Where a lot of leaders, they want to force it, right? They want to go in there and chew them out and hopefully inspire them or shame them into motivation,
right? And
go win the game. But,
and sometimes there may be that opportunity to do it, but sometimes you need to bring a different temperature. He talked about Larry Bird, how Larry Bird, he said, was the calmest guy he'd ever played with in any sport in the last few minutes of the game, always. And that calm just brought everybody else down and allowed everybody else to succeed and to run the plan without getting so uptight about, the stress and pressures of the moment or of the day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything else with the ordered lives or come to mind?
Just this notion that what we do, communicates and being clear on who you are and what you stand for and having that clarity of focus that if I'm going to be effective with others, I need to be effective in my own life. That's where it all starts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Which one do you want to go to next?
Oh, let's talk about. I want to come back to number 2. Let's not do number 2 yet. Let's talk about this number 3. The attribute is gratitude, and we titled it in the book a leadership multiplier. This was an interesting one. This was one that several leaders talked about. And you think about gratitude as this nice attribute, but the notion that gratitude actually is something that helps you in your leadership. Arthur Brooks talks about, gave the example of we have this gland at the back of the top of our brainstem called the amygdala. And the amygdala is what governs the fight or flight mechanism and we have lots of conditioning around someone pushes you either push back or you run and all of that. And you think about in our lives where we have these pressures on us and we engage the amygdala and it sends these hormones this signals into our brain and we either fight or we flight. He said, gratitude is an interrupter. Think about in your own life, those people to whom you are grateful and for whom you're grateful. And he said, when you engage gratitude, it stops those signals and engages a different part of your brain. You move from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, to this more deliberative part of your brain where they call the executive part of your brain. And that's one of the things that changes your normal thought process. One of the CEOs talked about being in a room where there was some conflict with another colleague and they were instantly mad at that colleague and they disagreed and they had all kinds of reasons to disparage that other colleague and stopped themselves and said, okay, what about this person are you grateful for? And she talked about how it just changed the entire nature of that interaction. From this, I'm frustrated, I'm angry with you, to I'm grateful for you for this and for this and for this. And it changed the entire dynamic of that discussion. It changed how she approached him. It changed the outcome. And the lesson for her was gratitude is so powerful when we engage with other people. And other CEOs talked about, what has happened is we're grateful over time and the impact those relationships, how they've ended up bearing this marvelous fruit because of gratitude. So I don't know if we typically think of gratitude as a leadership competency, but I think it is one. And I think it's something that we can be more deliberate about and we can actually, develop skills for.
Yeah. And is it typically something that's like a personal exercise or something that like a leader could infuse into the culture of the organization?
I think it's both, but I actually think there's some questions that we've developed this thing called 5 questions on a Sunday evening, and one of the questions is, who was I grateful for this week? And did I acknowledge that person? And how can I more deliberately do that? And so, yes, I think that we can develop skills around this. And I think there's certain guys, we have these things in the book at the end of each chapter called introspections. And they're just 4 simple questions to help do some simple skill building around each of these attributes. So for gratitude, who was I grateful for this week? And who needs to hear me express my gratitude for them?
Yeah. And that can go a long way, especially in these church leadership roles we have. There's so many people involved, and you're kind of going through the motions on Sundays at times, but to really have space to extend gratitude, that means a lot. I remember when I was called as a bishop, I opened a drawer in the clerk's office, and there's this thick stack of letterhead, right, with my ward name on it. Whatever. I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to send, I'll never need this many sheets of paper with our ward name on it. And so I made a practice where I would write a handwritten letter on one of those and mail it out to ward members, right? And the impact that it had on people was just amazing. Just these moments of, hey, I see you, I recognize you, thanks for showing up, thanks for doing whatever it is you do there, right? And it was really impactful.
These are things that people will remember. I had one former CEO tell me the story about he was running a firm, and there was a woman on his team that was a great contributor, and she retired. She'd been there for years and years and years. And after she left and packed up her stuff, they were getting the desk area ready for someone else to move in, and he found tucked away a note that he had written her that she had kept all these years, and she'd put it in a place where only she could see, right? And for him, that was almost like, wow, I didn't realize. I don't think as leaders we realize the power that comes when we express gratitude. And in a church setting, in a business setting, in a family setting, I think that's something that I'm not sure some are natural there, but I'm not sure we're all really good at that.
Yeah, it seems like a skill that nobody really fully attains.
And you think about, in when you're in a ecclesiastical setting, in a church setting, where you're asking people to serve in a calling, right? And they do so with all of their heart, their might, their mind, and their strength, not because they're paid, but because they love the Lord and they want to contribute. And I think that's worthy of expressing gratitude.
Yeah,
often.
Anything else with gratitude that we missed? Or is that...
No, just that it's something we can get good at.
Yeah. It can be a skill set that needs practice, right?
Yeah.
Go back to number 2, or what do you think?
No, let me just walk through these and see if any of these jump out. So, ordered lives is number 1. The second one is the work that matters. When built on the first attribute, that our lives, that we're in charge. Let's make sure that we're doing those things that are leading us in the right direction. And then we talk about gratitude. And I mentioned the conversation we had with Liz Wiseman, leading when no one handed you the mic. And what are those things that we can do as leaders that invite people to volunteer their finest efforts, which leads to number 5. Maybe I'll talk about 5. I'll go through all these, then I'll come back and talk about 5 for a minute. But those leaders that don't just are trustworthy, because that's important, but are trusting. So I'll come back and talk about that in a second. Had a beautiful conversation with Steve Young, and if you've talked with, has Steve been on?
Not yet. I'm working on it.
Boy, and he's written a couple of books with Deseret Book that talk about this concept of what he called the irrationality of love. This notion of transactional versus transformational, and the greatest leaders are those who love. And in our lives, we have these transactional elements. You're in a work setting, you've got performance objectives, and if you do this, then you get that, and all of that is good and important. In our relationships, sometimes we set our relationships up like this: I will extend this to you if you demonstrate this kind of behavior, and we transact. It becomes this transactional approach, and that's necessary. But there's something beyond that, transformational, when we just love, and that was a wonderful conversation with Steve. The 7th one is the attribute of listening. I'm not sure there's ever leadership development book or course you'll ever go through where the notion of empathy isn't addressed, and how can we engage other people and help them feel understood, the power of that. We talked about a bunch of leaders. Number 8 was what we call failure, grace, and the long game. And it was really interesting how so many of these leaders talked about the great kind of profound learnings that occurred when they made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And so leadership is not about not making mistakes. Sometimes it's about making mistakes and overcoming those mistakes. And how sometimes, guilt is probably a good thing because it tells us we've done something wrong, but sometimes we attribute shame to that, and we put that second layer on, and that shame causes us to hide and want to conceal things, right? We learn about that in the temple. We want to hide from our mistakes. Yeah. And as leaders, one of the things we need to do is own them, learn from them, and elevate everybody through them. So that was really interesting. The 9th attribute was defining winning and building humans at the same time, and how important it is in a calling or in a professional setting that we are clear what success means. I remember having that conversation with a church leader. We were defining what is success in this calling, and people were all over the board, and that's okay. But having that kind of clarity and doing it in such a way that you're honoring the people doing it, mm-hmm. right? So you see, as we go through these, there's a lot of connective tissue between all of these. The power of small wins was the 10th one, and you've probably heard of the metaphor or the story of the 2 stone cutters who are cutting stone, and someone comes up to them and says, "What are you doing?" And one person said, "Well, I'm chipping away the stone." And the other person said, "Well, I'm building a cathedral." Mm-hmm. And we use that as a great example of having a profound vision. Yeah. And I love that story. And I love the idea of a profound vision. But one of the things that several of these leaders said to us is, but there's something about ending the day knowing that you've won the day. And chipping the stone away from this particular area and doing it well and doing it right, and knowing that you've won that day is really different. There's a difference between satisfaction and engagement or inspiration. And sometimes we need to know that we've won the day, and the power of those small wins that comes is great. And then the last one was contribution beyond today's title. We had some great interviews with amazing leaders who their career, formal business career, in some cases their formal church leadership is sort of, they've done that. They've been mission leaders, they've been stake presidents, and they're not doing that again. And they said, the time of my life right now, it might be the time of my most profound leadership contribution. I don't have the title anymore. I'm not the CEO anymore. But what I'm doing now as a leader is maybe the most important leadership work of my life. Yeah. So that was really interesting.
That's cool. That's cool.
Happy to talk about any of these.
Did you want to bounce up to trusting leadership?
Yeah. So think about this. You think about those leaders in your life. Stephen Covey gave this great quote where he said, "Leadership is seeing and communicating another's worth and potential so clearly that they begin to see it in themselves." And I love asking the question of leaders. Who is a leader in your life that saw you? Maybe even at a time where you didn't see you, but they saw you. And because they did, you believe them. You may not believe yourself, but you believe their vision of you. And because of how they articulate that, in other words, how they trust you makes all the difference. So we interviewed Stephen M. Covey for this, and he wrote the New York Times bestseller book, The Speed of Trust, and it's wonderful. And it talks about being the leader that is able to build trust. And trust is so important because where trust is evident, where trust is manifest, everything else runs smoother, right? Everything is faster, everything costs less. Trust is great. But he said something that kind of surprised us in the interview. He said, I'm going to talk about trust. I said, yes. He said, but actually, I'm not really going to talk about trust. That's just table stakes. That's the price of entry. If you want to be an effective leader, you got to be trustworthy. Yeah. Period. And stop. We know that. He said, where you take it the next level is you're the leader who extends trust, mm-hmm. who is trusting. maybe at a time where they don't believe it themselves, but you give them that opportunity. And of course, we talked about extending trust is not being dumb about it. Remember, Ronald Reagan said, trust, but verify. People need to live into that. But giving the opportunity for people to hear you say and see you believe that in your behavior, you believe in them. Such a powerful concept. So I love talking with leaders about that notion and hearing from them stories of leaders that extended trust. I'll give you one example.
Yeah.
There was one leader who I asked this question, and he raised his hands like, I got to share. So, all right, tell me your story. And he said, I was 14 years old. I'd made every possible mistake that a 14-year-old could make. I was incarcerated. I was in a troubled youth detention center. He said, I'm sitting at the cafeteria one day, and this worker, I don't know if he's a social worker or whatever, but the guy that worked there came up and knelt down next to me, put his hand on my shoulder. He looked in the eyes, and he asked the question, what would you like to do with your life? And he said, normally that question might have set me off because I was an angry young man and confused. But for whatever reason, it didn't. And he said, I don't know. He probably said, because that's how 14-year-old boys talk. But in his mind, he said, I don't know. And he said, this person looked him in the eyes and said, with total sincerity, I just want you to know I believe in you. And you can do anything you put your mind to. He said, he got up, he walked away. And I sat there dumbfounded. Because he said, honestly, I had never had a single thought. It had never occurred to me that I could do something in my life. Just hadn't occurred to me. That's not how I grew up. He said, I started to think about it. And he said, this leader stayed with me. And sometimes it was tough love. It was high accountability, but always with the reaffirmation, I believe in you. And he said there was a vision that sparked with me. And he said, I graduated from high school. I was the first person in my family ever to do that. So you kind of get a sense of where he'd come from. He said, I discovered that I could learn, that I liked it, that I was good at it. And I applied to university and I got in. I couldn't believe it. And I got my 4-year degree and I thrived. I loved it. I discovered that I was smart, that I could learn. And after that, he said, I started dating and met a beautiful girl. We got married, started our family. And then I went back and got my master's degree. And he said, I now lead this significant part of this organization, this amazingly innovative organization with this incredible team where I'm their leader. And he said, sometimes I have to pinch myself and say, how did I get here?
Yeah.
He said, I can trace it back to that day when that leader said, I believe in you. Wow. And you can do anything you put your mind to it, and then stayed with them, right? That's the power. Yes, you have to be trustworthy, but that's the power of being a leader who trusts others, who is trusting. It's transformational. Sometimes it is over the course of lots of years. And sometimes it's as leaders, everything we do communicates. I was giving a speech in Mexico City one time, and this guy said, can I just share? And he told the story of a boss that he'd worked with 35 years prior. And one day in a short exchange, the boss came to him and said to him something like this, you have talent in this area, I've noticed. I think you ought to make this change in your career. Let's make that happen. And I asked him, so what'd you do? He said, well, I made the change. I said, what kind of impact did that have? He said, it changed everything in my life. The whole trajectory of my career changed. Then I asked him, that was 35 years ago. How long was that conversation? He said, a minute, couple minutes. Do you think if you were to find that gentleman today, 35 years later, that he would have even recalled that? He said, probably not. But then I asked him again, what kind of impact did that have? He said, everything. Everything in my life changed because that leader trusted me to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so trusting in others is not necessarily this accountability exercise, though that's maybe part of it, but it's more the, I trust you in your journey with your life, with your potential in this role or in this life. Right? And
you help provide vision, maybe at a time where people have that vision and you're just guiding them. I see that a lot in my current responsibility as stake president, that so many of them are, they're on their way to medical school or dental school or law school or investment banking or elementary school teaching or whatever. And there's a subset that aren't quite sure yet. And so they need that sense of vision given to them. And we've all had that in our lives. We've all had those leaders. In fact, I invite those who are listening to this and watching this, think about that leader who expressed confidence in you, who saw something in you, maybe at a time when you didn't even see it, but because they did, you're different today.
Yeah.
And my challenge would be, find some way to acknowledge them. They may not even be here anymore. Find some way to honor what they did. And then the second thing to think about is, and who right now in your circle, right now in your calling, in your work, in your family, could benefit from you seeing them that way, giving them that vision that they're capable of doing something that they may not see it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Any other one you want to make sure we cover before we wrap up, or?
Well, let me just talk about behavior number 2, the work that matters.
Okay, yeah.
I love this one, and maybe just share a personal experience about this one. I think one of the people that we talked with, CEOs, shared this statistic with us, and it caused me to just pause for a second. He said, when a child is born, we have 2.4 billion seconds. And every second that passes is a second that we'll no longer have. And we get, to the end of our mortal experience here, and it doesn't matter how much money we've made or how influential we were, we can't manufacture any additional seconds, right? What's gone is gone. And so what we do with those seconds matters. And that's what really the second behavior is all about. It's the work that matters, and focusing on making sure that we are spending time on the stuff that is consistent with what we've identified as that matters, right? And so there's just a little practice that we invite people to consider. We call the 5x4.
Okay.
And this is hard. This is causes, I've sort of lived in this world for a lot of my life, and I set aside every Monday morning at 8 a.m. to kind of go through this exercise. You're planning your week, and of course you have your meetings and all your other stuff, and we all do that.
Yeah.
But what are 5 critical things above everything else that needs to be done this week? And that causes you to dig deep, to make sure I'm not just spending my time doing something that keeps me busy, but I'm spending my time focusing on those things that are more important than the other things. And it's a natural prioritization exercise. My guess is that many of us kind of do something like that already. But when I'm actually sitting down and I write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I go through that, and I think about all of the things, and I have my list. It's a little bit of a discipline to go through and identify, here are the things that I really need to make sure I attend to this week. And then more important to that, just to the right of that, I do 1, 2, 3, 4. Who are 4 people in your life that you can touch some way this week? Professional, personal, family, church. But who could you make a connection with this week in a way that would lift them, that would be meaningful to them, that would engage them in some way? And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard to think. I think sometimes we get so busy thinking about all the stuff that we've got to do that we miss who are the people. And sometimes it's a text. Sometimes it's a note. I got to send flowers to this person. Or I love what you talked about when you were a bishop, the handwritten note. That's such a lost art in today's world. And when I receive something like that, it's like, wow, that was really, really thoughtful. So just maybe.
And is that like a exercise like that you're writing these things down, scheduling things, or
Yeah. I write them down. I put them in, because if I don't, then I lose them. So just a personal example of this, I was thinking about this whole experience and I was, at the time I had a 13-year-old son. He's now married and has a couple kids, but he was 13. And if you were to have asked either of us, how's your relationship? We would have said, fine. But if you got into the truth of it, I probably would have said, he's someone who doesn't want to clean his room. And he probably would have said, my dad stands in the way of all my joy and happiness in life, because he was 13, I was the dad. So I was thinking about my son, Matt, and what could I do? He's on that list. What could I do this week that would make a connection? You're not going to solve all the world's problems in a week, but what's one thing I could do this week? And I was looking at my calendar. I realized I had a trip to New York City a couple weeks out in the future. And so I was like, hey, Maddie, do you want to go to New York with me? He said, well, I'm in school. I said, I'll let you get out of school. I said, done. That, skipping school trumped having to spend time with Dad. So I said, here's the deal. You get to plan this whole trip. I've got these 2 meetings. Other than that, you're in charge. And we can go Empire State Building, the Rockefeller Center. We can go to Central Park, these great restaurants, whatever you want to do, you get a pick. And so we spent the 3 weeks planning. It was great. And he got to be the final voice. I said, there's just one caveat. He said, what's a caveat? All right, there's just one thing you got to consider. That is, it's a have to, okay? We're going to see a Broadway play. Well, my wife did musical theater in college, and that's been part of our family, but he was a football playing 13-year-old, and he's like, Dad, that's not going to happen. I said, no, but here's the deal. You get a pick. And said, okay, I can agree to this. So we shook hands, and so we go to New York. It was awesome. It was cold. So on the plane in, our first plan was to go to a sporting goods store and buy jackets. With New York, I think we got Knicks jackets, and that was a highlight for him. And then we did all the stuff. The meetings went well. The stuff was great. We were going home on Saturday morning, and it was Friday afternoon, and we still hadn't seen the play. So I said, Matt, it's time. So we go to the ticket booth, and we see all these placards of shows that I would love to see. And we see this, we can see this. There's just one that I was like, we're not going to see that. Of course. Matt says, well, I want to see that one.
Nice.
Did you know there was a musical version of the movie Rocky?
Oh,
I'm a Rocky guy. I like that. I live in Philadelphia, but I have no interest in seeing the musical version. No, thank you. Yeah. I said, Matt, I'm not going to see the musical version of Rocky. Sorry, it's not going to happen. You're going to see this or this. He said, Dad, you said I could pick. So I was like, dang it. And I shelled out all of this money to get great seats. We're right on the aisle of the orchestra, right on the side, kind of halfway up. And Kurt, it was awesome.
Wow.
Rocky did all his workout and he drank 5 raw eggs in front of us. It was amazing. But we get to the final scene, and they put all the people in this intersection, the orchestra section, up on the stage. They had some risers put on the stage. And from the ceiling descends this boxing ring. And Matt and I then found ourselves literally with ringside seats to the final scene.
Oh, cool.
Where Rocky and Apollo Creed are in the ring, and they're throwing punches and fake blood's flying, and they're singing. And when that final bell rings and Rocky is still standing, the only person, the whole audience got to their feet, they screamed and cheered, Matt and I leading the way. It was awesome. It was just one of those great father-son memories. And I'm flying home on Saturday morning, and I have this sort of blinding flash of the obvious, how easy it would have been not to have had that experience. Mm-hmm. Because life is just so crazy. It's just so busy. So there's a little bit of discipline as we lead our own life. This is part of the roots of let's make sure that you're clear that you're the one that brings the temperature into the room. But then how you spend those 2.4 billion seconds matters.
Yeah. And really being intentional of infusing these things with substance that will last beyond the moment. Yeah. Right.
That word intentional really kind of is the essence of the book. It's let's be intentional about our leadership.
Yeah. Really good. So if people want to check it out, where
so the book goes pre-sale at all of the outlets on July the 10th. That'll be Barnes & Noble and Amazon and wherever you buy your books. It'll be available. It'll formally release at the end of the summer, but it's available for pre-sale right now.
Awesome. Love it. So I'm curious, before we wrap up, like what did you include yourself in these interviews?
Oh, yeah.
And what was the principle then, and how has that morphed since going through this entire book?
Anytime you write something, there's a little bit of exposure. I learn so often through mistakes that I have made. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of those in the book, and, things that, and same with my colleagues, my co-authors, about when we did something stupid, or when we're not kind in a relationship, or we, weren't paying attention, and the profound lessons that come as we overcome that. We were able to combine, over 50 years of experience in leading and teaching into the book. And so we did infuse a lot of our own story in this. But we love the concept. We love this notion. We end the book with just this little kind of vignette you remember from Camelot, where Arthur has created the round table concept, where people could come. There's no head of the table, and these knights of the round table would come, and they had voice, and everyone could contribute, and it was this profound, like, leadership and social concept that people would have, and yet we learned through that play that leadership is also hard. And you're dealing with people. I have this quote that my colleagues tease me that I use all the time. My life as a leader would be so much easier if I didn't have these darn people. Because people, it's hard. And getting people to engage and volunteer their finest efforts is difficult. And King Arthur had that challenge. And the knights revolted, and there was intrigue and, all the stuff. And they ended up in war. And the very last scene of that play, they're getting ready for battle. It's early on a morning. Arthur's got his armor on and ready to go lead his troops. And there's this young lad that walks out of the woods. And Arthur says, "Who are you and what are you here?" And he said, "Well, I've been learning about the round table, and I want to be it." And this is this, and he cited the virtues of what Arthur was trying to do by heart. And King Arthur was so touched by him that he had the young boy kneel down right there, and he took his sword out and he knighted him a knight of the round table. And then he's too young to go into battle, so he sent him home and said, "Go on, pass it on. You be that leader. You be that agent for change in your life." And I think that really is what we're trying to accomplish with this book is this notion of passing it on, of being that leader that makes that difference. Go take that charge yourself. And leadership is a beautiful thing.